Welcome to Dialogue and Happy Chinese New Year. As the week-long Spring Festival holiday ends here in China, many Chinese ended up staying at home due to pandemic restrictions. But with traveling down, online shopping and box office revenues, for example, boomed. How has the Chinese economy done overall this holiday season? What new patterns of consumption are emerging in China and elsewhere? And with the global economy still struggling, what are China's economic prospects in the coming months? To discuss all these issues and more, I'm joined by Wang Dan, Chief Economist at Hang Seng Bank China. Also by Andy Mock, Senior Research Fellow at the Center for China and Globalization. And by Michele Garazzi, former Undersecretary of State at Italy's Ministry of Economic Development. That is our topic. I'm Wang Guan. Andy, let me go to you first. In Beijing, staycation is a big word here. People are staying home this year because of the pandemic. They really, missed the opportunity of traveling, going back home and see their loved ones. But the upside could be, the boom in delivery services, box office revenues. How have you been observing the Chinese economy, and how do you think it has fared so far this holiday season?
Well, Wang Guan, I think that the economy during the Spring Festival holiday demonstrated remarkable resilience. So if you go out around Beijing, the restaurants, the retail stores are really bustling, full of people. I spoke with the CEO of a wine retail business that has shops throughout China. And she said that really their sales have been off the charts. And I think this is really indicative of the economic situation in China. But I want to add, too, here that this really is just a symptom of the trust that the people have in government. And some of the most important things in the world we can't see. Think about oxygen. Without oxygen, people could not survive. And trust is largely invisible. But without this trust of the people in China's government, I don't think we would be seeing this economic resilience.
Dr. Wang in Shanghai, what's your observation on the bright spots as well as the challenges of China's economy this holiday season?
The consumption is certainly robust compared to the 2020 level, but if we compare that to 2019, it is still in contraction. And large cities and small cities have very uneven recovery. And when we observe Tier 1 and Tier 2 cities, most of them are actually having a boom. But if we're looking at smaller cities or outside city area, like little counties or rural area, then their retails and consumption are quite low. And it is partly because a lot of the migrants are told to stay put for fear of the spread of the pandemic. And that means the usual labor exporting provinces will suffer a bit more, like Henan or Heilongjiang. But for some of the labor importing provinces like Guangdong and Zhejiang, they would have more people, and those people have saved up and they're willing to spend in the Spring Festival.
Right. I want to go to our friend Michele Garazzi. He's the former Undersecretary of State at Italy's Ministry of Economic Development. Sir, you have been living in China for quite a while. As an expat from Europe, observing China and the Chinese people celebrating this holiday, what sectors of the Chinese economy impressed you?
The online delivery, digital services, and even local retails and restaurants. As I follow up on the point you just said before, of course, the effect on Tier 1, Tier 2 city is stronger than on the low-income cities, also because I'm in Shanghai. I would have gone to one of the third-tier cities in the countryside to spend my money. Now I spend it in Shanghai, almost as if I was on holiday. I would go to the restaurant twice a day. And of course, my purchasing power is a little bit more, it's higher than the average local resident in Guizhou, for example. And therefore, this is another compounding effect that makes these Tier 1, Tier 2 cities fare much better than the low-income places. And of course, the cities are also, they have these economies that are more developed, digital services, going to the cinemas, and all the delivery boys that we are trying to, in a way, emulate in my own country, in Italy. We're trying to understand, and this is, I think, interesting, as a benchmark exercise, what is China doing that we in Europe, and in my case, particularly in Italy, we can learn from this experience. And I have to say, over the last 12 months, I personally have been half of the time here in Shanghai, half of the time in Italy. I think we are getting used to a behavioral shift. I think there are some industries that have been hit almost permanently: airline, tourism, retails. We don't need to buy as many clothes as before, but maybe we need to eat as much as before. But I do see and I perceive in the people around me, my friends, my colleagues, a really structural behavioral change. In the old days, money permitting, we would take a plane and go for a weekend to Thailand, to Japan, to Korea. In Europe, we would go the same to London. Now, I think our psychology has changed and we are no more willing to do that, even when the lockdown opens.
Well, Andy, I want to go back to you. When you talk about the Chinese economy, it's a very big concept, right? We're really talking about aggregate level of things. Do you think these bright spots, the online sector, the delivery services, can really compensate for, let's say, a lack of businesses for brick-and-mortar stores, the declining revenue from train and air travels?
No, certainly, Wang Guan. China's economy, as large as it is and as complex as it is, there are a number of bright spots, as we touched on. I think Wang Dan made a great point that in third-tier, fourth-tier cities that are labor exporters, the picture is a little bit different. There are just so many moving parts here, too, because we're in the midst of a technological revolution. It's not just e-commerce, the shift from offline to online retail. We're also in the early stages of, I think, a historic change in automation, whether that's through robotics, artificial intelligence. So this is an area that many countries need to get right. And it looks like China is doing a pretty good job on this as well. So one of the issues that any government needs to pay attention to is inequality. And whether that's due to geographical reasons or a digital divide, other reasons, that if a government does not pay attention to this, it can lead to significant problems. And we can see with China's poverty alleviation program successfully concluding last year, other efforts it's making to widen or to narrow the digital divide as well between rural areas and urban areas, especially tier 1 cities. I think there's room for optimism, but clearly there are very difficult challenges facing China's economy as well.
Dr. Wang, in Shanghai, you talked about the fact that consumption was still a bit off, especially if we look at the data in 2020, consumption was notably less robust. What do you think can be done at this point to really stimulate domestic consumption in the months and perhaps years to come in China?
Well, it has to be a combination of policy support and some innovation. And so far, I think the first round of income distribution has done a pretty good job because China's growth has moved inland, mostly in central and western China. And last year, we still saw that Tibet, Yunnan, and Guizhou were the 3 fastest growing regions. But then when it comes to the second round of income redistribution, there needs to be more work that can be done by local government because we have a higher number of unemployment outside the cities. So there should be direct subsidies to workers for them to tide over this difficult period. And so far, there hasn't been many programs like this because we're mostly supporting the factories to go back to normal, but not to support consumers. And when it comes to innovation, I think the central bank digital currency can be a very good tool to achieve that goal. Because when you distribute cash subsidies to consumers, this way it is more direct, and then you can track where the money is spent.
Right. Hopefully those advice will be heeded. That's from Dr. Wang Dan. I should correct myself just now. Sir, Mr. Geraci, what do you think? I mean, do you think China's booming e-commerce sector as well as its online entertainment sector really can last, or is this a temporary phenomenon from this pandemic?
No, I think it will last. Of course, the growth rate will need to taper off. We're looking at today about a third of the Chinese economy comes from digital, a mix of digital services or physical goods sold online, so an extended definition of digital. But we're still talking about one third growing at double digit. So it is strong. And I think it will continue, of course, to grow because this will expand into other sectors. It's like a shift. We are looking at less trade of goods and more trade of services. And many of these services are digital, and many of those goods are also sold via digital channels. So I think this is a strong structural change. As I said, it will reach its limit. The other engine of growth of the Chinese economy, let's not forget, is still the migration from rural to urban areas that provides in the order of 10, 15, year by year changing million new city residents that just by the sheer difference in income between urban and rural, which is 3 times, already it's almost as if the population in China were to increase, and that's already gives about 1.5% of GDP growth, just the migration. So if we put that on top of the innovation and the improvement in the efficiency due to digital services, I think almost looking, and here maybe I disagree with people who tend to be bare on China, we almost have a rock bottom, 3%, 4% GDP growth in China, no matter what, of course, under normal circumstances. And this is the bedrock of the 5.5% forecast for the next 5 years. So we almost have 4% in the bag by just natural, and then the government needs to do the other 1.5%, 2% to add and reach its targets. So I am positive because China does something very well. It moves the line between market and government intervention as needed. When the market forces can be left more freely because they have the energy, then the government takes a step back. When the market fails or is weaker, then the government intervenes with stimulus, policies, interest rate, have many levers they can play with to compensate. And I think this is the ideal mix that is not, in a way, a trajectory. We don't see the government over time taking less and less role or more and more. It just adapts according to the situation and tactical decision of the moment. And this is something that maybe in the West many analysts don't fully understand. And we always ask the question, is China becoming more of a market economy, more of a state economy? And the answer, in my humble view, is it depends. Last year and this year, of course, the government needs and has to play a bigger role, while in Europe, because we don't have a strong government channels, we have a minus 10% GDP growth, and China has 2.3. So not only the government has this, like it's an elastic that can move one side on another one, but also we can see from the result that the system seems to work within, as we have heard, the many moving parts that are hidden below these large overall aggregate figures. Let's not forget we have regional differences, we have income differences, we have, of course, some people who suffer out of it, but this is a kind of a normal, let's say, effect of a system that on average gets better and better, and there's always someone that needs a little bit more help to join the fast-moving train.
Right. It's really difficult to talk about the performance of an economy without talking about COVID control. So, Andy, I mean, of course, it's a delicate balance to prevent the pandemic as well as growing the economy. How do you think the Chinese government has fared balancing these two factors?
Well, I think we could look at this question in relative terms and in absolute terms. And I think from both perspectives, there really is little argument if we look at the facts that the Chinese government has done, I think, an unexpectedly good job. And I say unexpected, meaning that if we roll the clock back about 14 months, there were many Western media reports saying that democracies handle public health crises like pandemics, epidemics better. And I think this is clearly, the record shows in the last year, to be completely wrong. And in fact, the opposite is true, in that we can see, not just in Beijing and Shanghai, but really throughout China, that outbreaks are quickly identified and controlled. And I think this is the most important fact, because what this means is people have the trust and the confidence to go to work, to go to school, to go shopping, and to a degree also to travel within China as well. And that provides the foundation for the economic resilience that we've been talking about, whether that's growth in digital services or even the offline economy as well. And I think we also need to recognize here too that while COVID-19 has been devastating for economies around the world, there have been silver linings as well. In China, as the workshop of the world, but increasingly the leader in product development and in innovation. So I think providing both of these to the world, that whether we're looking at PPE, personal protective equipment, other goods as well. So in places like the US where people are stuck at home, many people engage in home improvement projects, and that creates demand for goods as well. And China has excelled for the last few decades in increasing the purchasing power of Americans, Europeans, other people around the world by providing affordable, high-quality goods that they perhaps would not be able to afford otherwise.
Right. Dr. Wang Dan, from the point of view of an economist, how would you rate the Chinese government's COVID prevention and control measures from last year's aggressive nationwide lockdown this time of the year to this year's targeted lockdown in the Northeast, in Hebei, with advisories urging people not to travel during the holiday season?
If we're looking at the economic indicators, they've been doing a great job. Last year, China had a growth of 2.3%, and about half of that growth was from industrial production, and that's wholly because of the lockdown measures. That was immediate and very targeted. And then this year, with the resurgence of the COVID case in northern China, the measures were also very fast, and the industrial productions were not interrupted. And that is a big achievement. And when it comes to the rest of the growth, then that was mostly depends on the rest of the world, because export contributed to the other half of the growth. And that has left China in a very good position of providing the world with more products related to COVID and also with daily necessities. But then, in a way, it reflected one thing that the Chinese government was not doing as their priority, because foreign governments, especially those in Europe and the US, they subsidize consumer first before they subsidize factories. And this is one reason China can get ahead with economic recovery. But then, when the economies are back to normal, Chinese government will have to subsidize consumers, doing something similar to what has been done in the US and in Europe.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Geraci, the leaders of G7, including that of your own country, will meet tomorrow to talk about, of course, the economic recovery and COVID prevention. Now with vaccinations going on around the world, last time I checked, over 150 million people have been vaccinated worldwide. What's your prediction on the course of the global economy in the months to come?
I think it will be a split performance with Asia doing much better and Europe and other countries and the Western countries doing less so. This goes back to the concept that we were discussing before, the democracy versus non-democracy, who does better. And the key thing, and this is, I'm engaging daily with my friends in various governments. In Europe, we still don't understand that fighting the virus and fighting the economy are not in conflict. So we don't have to choose which one to do first. We need to do them at the same time, just like China did in Hubei. January, everything locked down for 60, 70 days, harsh for some people, but then get over and done with in 2.5 months. We, 1 year later, we are still chasing the problem because we do not have the political courage to impose strict lockdowns. We do not have, some countries, the financial muscle to compensate not just the worker, but of course also the enterprises, like we said. And so basically we've been going through waves of lockdown, opening up, number of contagious going down, going up, and now we are facing the third wave again. And this is really what the G7 and also the G20 that Italy hosted this year, we really need to address. But we've been talking for 12 months and we have done very, very little. Even recovery plan from the European Union, which is a good thing in principle. It's already 18 months later than we should have done. One thing, if I may, I report back to my Italian friends. I went to Wuhan a month ago. The thing that strikes me is that there is the Museum of COVID in Wuhan, where children go and witness the history of how China has managed to fight and win, hopefully for good, the battle with the virus. So in the mind of people in Wuhan, the virus is something that is now living inside the museum. It's in the past. And this is, I think, the most tangent and example of the key difference in the faces of how we are behind in Europe. And one of the things I do daily is really encourage Western governments to look at what China has done. We have two different systems. We cannot do everything. Of course, there are limits in our political and social system, but we need to learn from China, from Korea, from Japan, from Vietnam, even what Taiwan has done, and other regions in China and in Asia, because we need to really do a benchmarking exercise and get the best of what we can do. It's a little bit like when we go to a Chinese restaurant. We have a table with many dishes. Right. We don't have to eat everything. We can choose what we like. But we in Europe, we're still at the stage we don't really even look at the table because we presume that there's possibly not much we can adopt. And this is the battle I'm fighting every day, to make sure that at least we look and see what we can learn. And this is the goal of G7 and the goal of G20, but we are running out of time.
Yeah, I want to talk about the Chinese domestic economy, and it's hard to talk about it without mentioning the stellar performance of China's box office. Andy, Spring Festival, of course, is usually a most profitable time for China's box office, but this year's performance has been spectacular, let's say. China's box office broke single-day revenue record of all time in the world. I think that was 3 days ago. Did this impress you at all?
No, it certainly does, Wang Guan. In and of itself, this is a very impressive achievement, but I think it's also important from a symbolic reason as well, because the numbers I've seen are that during the Spring Festival holiday, China's box office was something like $775 million US. So that's a big number. But if we dig into these numbers, it actually is even more interesting. The top grossing film was a Chinese movie, which is the third in the series, Detective Chinatown 3, which came in at about more than $400 million. And I think what this shows is that the Chinese movie market is not just maturing, but the industry is able to produce consistently successful hits. So this matters not just for the movie industry in China, but as we heard, one of the biggest challenges the world faces that President Xi mentioned in his speech at Davos is that ideological prejudice and arrogance where certain countries are unwilling to learn from other countries, whether that's COVID, whether that's economic management, and especially in the case of China. But where we see the movie industry playing a role here is China has always lagged behind in the past in terms of soft power, just because it's been dominated mostly by the US. And as we see with the movie industry, China's creating successful movies, but also music performers. More and more we look at TikTok. The world is taking notice and saying, hey, you know, we really maybe can learn something from China. And at the very least, we should leave behind this ideological prejudice and arrogance to say that our way is the best way, the only way. And China's economic results are important, but frankly, economics are a bit boring for the average person. But when we see successful movies, successful songs, successful videos, now that also plays a role. So for these reasons, I'm very hopeful and very excited by China's box office performance this year.
Dr. Wang Dan, in Shanghai, do you have anything to add?
I think for Chinese business, actually the coming year will be a testament for their ability to complete two missions. One is upgrade and the other one is innovation. So right now, only the best and probably the most innovative business can survive in this market. And there are a lot to be done. And also, for many of the businesses, if they haven't survived, if they have already survived last year, on these coming 4 or 5 years will be an economic cycle on the rise. And we can see that there are a lot more opportunities, but companies need to be very careful about their debt level and be more innovative than normal.
Right, I want to stay with you, Dr. Wang. You know, this Lunar New Year has been very difficult for the travel industry, not just here in China, but around the world. Airlines in China suffered, railway services suffered because people canceled their trips or reduced their travel. What could be, you know, their solutions in the short term?
For airline industries, there are not many good solutions. One of them is to repurpose their flights. Usually they're for passengers, but in the future, at least in the next year or two, probably a lot of them will be diverted to cargos. But then another strategy all the airlines need to think about is to downsize. Because the economy won't just come back, the tourism especially. And within Chinese market, this is especially true because in the last decade, the local governments have invested a lot in building intercontinental airlines, and there are heavy investments. So without a good international environment for overseas tourism, I just don't see that any further investment can yield a good profit. So a lot of those airlines may need to seek mergers and acquisitions or just seek help or bail out from the government. I think it just has to be necessary.
Yeah, Mr. Garachi, we have about 30 seconds left. This is a tough question, I know, but your prediction on when are we able to travel again like we used to?
Another 12 months, March, April next year, 12 months for international travel as it used to be, or to have a similarity to the life before COVID. But it will take even longer to really go back to normality, even because there is that psychological change. People would not be willing to do it, even if they could. But we need to suffer for another year.
All right, Mr. Michele Garachi, Dr. Wang Dan, and Mark, thank you all so very much. And that will do it for this edition of Dialogue. Thank you for watching. I'm Wang Guan in Beijing.